Evening, everyone. I need somebody to remind me to hit the record. Oh, hold on.
Good evening. Welcome to another special meeting of the Norwich Select Board. This is Wednesday, November 29, 2023. My name is Marcia Calloway. I'm currently serving as chair. I'm joined tonight remotely by Mary Layton, Vice Chair, Roger Arnold, Pam Smith, and we don't have Priscilla Vincent yet. We're also joined remotely by Town Manager Brennan Duffy. This meeting is being held via Zoom only. The agenda and packet materials were distributed via the Norwich listserv. They're also available on the town website under the Select Board tab. Priscilla Vincent has now joined us. Brennan monitors the admission to our Zoom platform. We request that members of the public display their full name for admission. This has eliminated so-called Zoom bombing interruptions of our meetings, but it's also caused some confusion among some members of the community. If select boards are amenable, and I'd like you to sort of just say yes or no, we can offer that folks can contact a select board member if they're not getting in and let them know that they're trying to access the meeting. And then they can tell Brennan who will admit them because we know who they are. Is that okay with everybody? Can I have a nod? Yes, to Mary?
So is this different from our practice of just encouraging everyone to use their full name?
No, we're still encouraging that, but if somebody's having difficulty getting in, then, you know, they can let us know. We're not trying to keep people out. We're trying to stop being interrupted with Zoom bombings.
Okay, so it's a way to just keep an eye on who's showing up.
Right, and to help people who are having problems.
Okay.
Is that okay with everybody?
Sounds good to me.
I'm good with it. Some people don't know how to change their Zoom ID in their profile. So, you know, they've struggled with that. So I'm good with letting people in that we know.
And Miranda has those instructions. I've also sent them to people. You can just Google and Zoom has those instructions. All right, that's great. As always, everyone who is attending or participating in a meeting must focus their remarks, wait for their turn to speak. When recognized, speak clearly and loudly so that everyone can hear what's being said. For remote public questions or comments through Zoom, please raise your electronic hand to be recognized by the chair before speaking. For questions or comments through the telephone, press *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute after being recognized by the chair. I will monitor the Zoom view to acknowledge participants who wish to speak, and we will reach everyone who wants to comment, or at least we'll try. Remember to direct all comments or questions to the chair, not to other people, either on the board or in the remote audience. The order of speaking will generally be select board members, then members of the public participating remotely through Zoom. Consistent with our rules of procedure adopted in March 23, the chair may suggest commenters conclude their remarks within 3 minutes. Public comments for items not on this agenda should be offered after the budget presentation concludes, which is approximately estimated to be 8 p.m., but we did start a little late. Once again, we have a very thorough slideshow deck prepared by our town manager and finance department with an agenda for the budget presentation appearing on page 14 of the packet, also known as slide 2 of the presentation. To get through this presentation, there's a limited time for each person. I would ask everyone to hold their questions until the end when there will be time for questions. We want to make sure that all board members have an opportunity to ask a question. So I think we'll take one question from each board member at a time and then go back around as time allows. If we have time, we will reach members of the public. Anyone who has a question remaining that didn't get reached should send it to Brennan Duffy at bduffy@norwich.vt.us. So with that, is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Priscilla. Seconded by Priscilla. I'm going to call the question. Mary?
Yes.
Pam,
Yes.
Priscilla,
Yes.
Roger.
Yes.
Marcia, yes, unanimous. Thank you. With that, we'll move to the budget presentations. Brennan, would you like to lead us in tonight's discussion?
Sure. So we're now on round 4 of our budget presentations, and Joyce will again be walking us through her slide deck that she's prepared here over the last week. We will have a number of our departments speaking to their budgets and kind of talking through what they're looking to do for the next fiscal year, and a chance for people to ask questions if there are any about those. Joyce, I've made you a co-host, so I think you should be able to share your screen. And if you would just keep an eye on the waiting room occasionally when I've done the sharing of the co-host, I don't see people as they're trying to get in. So if you see anybody, just let me know that.
Okay. All right. Can you see my slide deck?
Yes.
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 Okay. All right. I'm going to go quickly through the Q&A slide deck because I think that most of these questions are kind of self-explanatory. So I need to move my pictures out of the way so we don't have a block on that. So in this deck, you're going to see 2 main sections. The Q&A section is where I place the answers to the questions that I received last week from the meeting. And I'm planning to update this deck with the questions that I received tonight so that there will be one complete list of the questions and answers for people to refer to. Then the second section is the article section. This is mainly driven by the requests from the department heads and related to their fund accounts. In addition, I have also added a couple of other talking points that have been mentioned over the past 3 weeks of meetings. I will continue to update this section so that when we finish the budget meetings, you will have a starting point for creating articles to present to the voters. So obviously anything in that article proposal section is just that. It's a proposal. It's going to need tweaking for dollars and wording as we go through time here. Next week, you'll receive an updated slide deck rather than a new or separate slide deck. This will provide a compilation of all the information in one place at your fingertips for our reference in the meeting on the 6th. So I guess, did anyone have questions on the question and answer section that I need to address? That would be my first question.
I can't see anyone.
Yeah, I can't either. I'll try to figure out how to.
Maybe if you have a question, if you hit the raise hand, that would alert us to who has a question.
Brennan, I had a call from Linda Cook, which I didn't take. So can you see her trying to get in?
I see Daniel's iPhone trying to get in.
Yeah, hold on here. I do have a.
Okay. All right. So I don't see any hands raised for the Q&A section. So I'm just going to
Mary
jump down.
has one.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
You're on mute.
Yeah, if you could go back to the sidewalk fund.
Okay.
I understood that that fund was created as a long-term capital fund in case the present sidewalks needed to be reconstructed. And it was based on a study done by Stephen Flanders, who figured out why it had to be $14,000 a year. And it's not for fire district sidewalks, but I'm just wondering whether it, even though it seems like nothing happens with it, the reason is because the sidewalks will eventually not be usable in 25 years. So it's just, maybe it's a question for the select board. Do we want to really think that far out? I mean, do we want to be that to be our thinking? That we have these sidewalks that will eventually need to be replaced. So it's just a thought.
But
I don't
I
know if
think,
it's even answerable, but
well, I think it sort of is like any other thing that we own that we need. Well, I think we own them. Do we own them? The sidewalks?
well, we're responsible for keeping them up, right? the town
Right.
one.
So, I mean, we try to save money for those big expenses, and that would be a big expense. So I don't know why we wouldn't sort of save a little as we go along.
Well, that was the point of the 14,000 a year. I'm just saying. I don't
Yeah.
know if this is saying that we should close it out or not. I can't quite tell.
Which slide are
No.
you looking at?
27,
Sidewalk fund right now does have money in it. I'm
Right.
not saying we should close it out. The question was, can we move money from the sidewalk fund or pay roadway and pedestrian safety items out of the sidewalk fund?
and the
That was the
answer-
question.
I see.
And we can't because the sidewalk fund is specifically earmarked for sidewalks, whereas
Yes.
the roadway and pedestrian is not earmarked for sidewalk work.
Okay, that's very good. Also a typo, it says sideway fund on the answer. This is a typo.
Oh, thank you. I'll fix that.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. All right, any other questions on that part?
I don't see any.
Okay, then I'm gonna jump down to the section on the articles. One comment on the question about the leases. And I'm gonna shrink this down again. Brendan, can you see the pictures if I close this? Are you able to see if somebody's got a hand raised? I'm afraid this,
I can toggle up and down, and also I have the waiting room.
okay.
I'm
Good to see you,
watching as well.
I'm
Danielle.
afraid the pictures are hiding the screens. Right?
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
imposed.
Okay. So I'm going to shrink mine down if you can see the hands raised. So I did have one question from Roger that came in yesterday, asking me to explain more on the bonds. So I reached out to Vermont Bond Bank. So Roger, I will have answers for you on that next week, and I will provide an extra slide that gives definitions and an instance like this for bonds as we compare the different financing options.
That's great. Thanks so much, Joyce.
Okay, sure. This was just a sample of a capital lease, and that may be something that we want to talk through a little bit more, but I wanted to give you an example and talk about that because a financing lease sometimes is referred to a finance agreement. And the kicker is, does it have in the contract a buyout option or not to make it a lease versus a purchase option, or a capital lease versus a regular lease? But again, I won't spend time on the legalese for that. So the article section, these are just, as I said, proposals. So I've kind of broken this out into different groups. So this is where we were sitting with the money that we were looking to infuse with articles or use up the surplus. And I did stick a section in there for the unanticipated emergency that stands right now at just under 12%. So if I round up, we're at 12%. So we might want to put some money into that. I'll have an answer for that next week when we talk about that. That's why you see a blank over here on Fund 50. And then these next sections are just the funds that the different departments have asked for requests for. So I just put those in as placeholders. And so I'll talk about those a little bit more as we go through things. I expect some of this to change as far as dollar amounts and verbiage, but like I said, it's just there as a placeholder. So any other questions on this slide deck?
Just a note, Joyce. I think VLCT recommends not to close any funds, like transfer funds if necessary, but not to close. I'm sure you've considered that in your recommendation to have language that has a closure, but that's something I had seen. I don't know why they don't recommend a closure, but I did see that. Maybe it's like an auditing thing or like a paper trail reason. But they say,
yeah, partly it has to do with NEMRIC too, because NEMRIC, if you close something instead of inactivating it, and there's a difference there between closing it and inactivating. So we'll have to talk about the verbiage for those different things and how that works with Emmerich.
Right.
But we don't want to have them keep showing up in all the reports when there's no money in them and we're not using them for anything. So we want to get them inactive, but
Yes.
not necessarily off the books, because as you'll see, the flag fund, for instance, has been inactive, but
Right.
we're going to reopen that this year. So
Okay.
there's a soft or a sweet spot, I guess I'll say, in between closing, inactivated, and truly getting rid of it. So if the police department, we don't have a police department anymore, do we really need that fund going forward or ever? As opposed to some others that might be repurposed or reused.
Sure. Okay.
So, yep. Whoop.
Joyce,
Yes.
at some point, I'd like more sort of discussion about the lease situation, because I'm not, and we don't have to do it right now, but I'm just not clear about how much we'd be paying annually if, in the example, for example, those 2 police cars.
Okay. So are you okay if I hang on to that for the end of the conversation and give the department
Absolutely.
heads a chance to present? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm flagging that one then for you, Marcia.
Thank you.
Okay. Other questions?
I don't see any.
Okay. I'm just jotting my notes here, so I get Roger's question and yours down here.
Okay.
Funds. Okay, then I'm going to close this one and let's open the second. Okay, now hopefully you can see the budget for department budget presentation part 2.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So this one, I'm gonna start off with my part of the presentation. In just basically saying, all right, here's what I need for next steps. Because I'm showing the same summary slides that I showed last week and the week before. All of those summary slides I will be updating as we get through the end of this meeting with the takeaways from the previous weeks. So by the end of this presentation, you will have been shown all the line items for each department that are currently in the budget and given the opportunity to discuss with each of the department heads those line items. My request is at the end of the meeting, I be provided a list of the changes that the select board as a whole would like to see in the budget presentations that will be made next week. This list of changes will be integrated into the presentation that you will receive and be the starting point for our discussion. So in next week's packet, what I'm planning to give you is the updated summary slides that you are the same formats that you've been seeing for the last 3 weeks. But I will have brought them to whatever the current bottom line is for our budget. So all of those changes will be reflected. You'll also be presented with the full revenue and expense reports that are formatted as you would see them in the town report, using the same numbers that we arrive at for tonight. You will also have the fund balance report with June of 23. So that'll be the end of fiscal 23, the allocations and spending that has been done to date for fiscal 24 and the continued extra spending that we expect to make in 24. So we'll have a beginning balance for fiscal 25, the projected allocations that we come up with tonight, and the projected expenses that are taken out of the capital plan and from the department managers for those non-capital funds. So that will also be presented. So it's really important that I get a list of what changes you'd like to see for tonight that will give us kind of a stepping stone to share and start moving my live workbook next week. So that's my takeaways. That's my part of the presentation. I'm going to basically turn it over to the department heads. We've given them 10 minutes to present. And so hopefully they're going to speak at 5 or 6 minutes and then give some chance to have a question round at the end of those presentations. So I am going to skip pretty quickly through these. Here's your index if you need it. All of these screens are going to look very familiar with what you've got. Just a note that there are 2 departments today that are requesting different things that have been calculated in these summaries. So these numbers will change a little bit, but I haven't seen anything drastic that is moving those numbers. But all of these summary screens will change as a result of what we come up with tonight. Next week in the Q&A section, I'll have a little bit more information on the surplus because I've had a couple of questions come up about that. So I'll be expanding on that next week in the Q&As. And summary departments, I obviously will get rid of the highlights, but you'll be able to see line item by line item where each department lands and what our overall budget is for the total dollar amount of increase and the fractional increases. And then you'll also be able to see the totals by department and the salaries and benefits summaries, the same as I presented before. So those will all be available. All the funds will be one group, and instead of these summary slides, you'll see the fund balance report. So you'll see the beginning balances and the actuals that are reported for that. So then I'm going to go to Conservation Commission, and I'll actually speak for Craig because he's not able to be here and he's traveling. He did provide this information. There's a pink note right in the center, an additional $2,000 for trail bridges needing to be replaced. His original request, he had put that $2,000 in there because they wanted to do some trail work. But since then, they have decided that they would spread that trail work out over the next 3 or 4 years so that they were able to keep their budget flat. Other than that, there weren't really any topics of conversation that they came up with or changes that they needed. So that was pretty simple. Okay, so next up is Bree. So I'm going to turn it over to Bree, and Bree and all the department heads, just let me know when you want the slides to change.
Okay. So I've been told to go pretty quick through the changes, the largest changes that are in here so that we have time for questions. So the biggest change on mine is completely getting rid of the assistant rec director this year. It was approved with the provision that the revenue would be raised to offset their salary, but the revenue was planned to come from reopening an aftercare program at Tracy Hall. Unfortunately, the program itself required a director to run it, and the staffing for that fell through pretty much at the last minute. So without the funding to cover the position, it didn't seem prudent to hire that employee full-time. So I worked with finance and HR, and we cut it down to part-time, but ended up cutting it entirely, just given the reality that funding it this way just doesn't seem sustainable. I understand that I've requested the position for a few years, and I still do think it's necessary for the long-term growth of the department. However, at least for now, I feel it's more important for me to conserve my efforts and reduce the programs to those I can manage without the additional staffing. Joyce, I think that's it on that one. The next is I am requesting the formal renaming of the instructor line to instructor/contractor as suggested by our former finance director and also suggested by our treasurer, since that is how the fund has been used since last year. It covers anyone hired who carries their own liability insurance. We have reduced the funding for that line item, both to reflect the FY23 actual numbers and because we just made a shift to having our current program instructors who do carry their own insurance, having them rent their spaces directly from Tracy Hall so that I am not running their programs through our registration system. The other change on there would be coaching materials. That was just up just to cover the fact that we are no longer having our background checks done by the police department. Those are going to be done in-house. And we have a few more coaches taking on the Safe Sport program, which is a certification program that all head coaches take before they work with children. The program wage on here was reduced because it was previously increased for the projected switch of our referees and umpires to be hired as employees. We've actually switched that back to be paying them per diem. So they are now paid through the referee and umpire line again, but we do still need staff. So the field care was reduced given our wonderful ability to spread compost, overseed, and aerate the fields this year. which was great because it hadn't happened for over 2 years, but we did notice that it took just about 2.5 years to see an effect, a negative effect on the fields. So we're going to switch that. So we're not going to do that field treatment again until 2025. But until then, we will spot seed and apply the grub control whenever we have the issues with all that tearing up of the grass. So that should cover that. Then we get to the designated fund. We are requesting $15,000, and that is for the planned maintenance and replacement of the playground structures at Huntley Meadows. They are projected to be replaced in 2026, and that is for the cedar house. I called the Vermont Shed Company who we bought it from, and they said that they will come check to see if they can repair it because they no longer sell that shed. But the large structure does have some issues of wear on it, and it is scheduled to be replaced in 2026. So that is moving towards that scheduled replacement. The tennis courts, I'm requesting $75,000, and that is 25% of what it would be costing to replace, full reconstruction of the tennis courts. And that would be planning to ask for a USTA grant to cover 50%, or Vermont Recreation Implementation Grant, which is, oh, sorry, Joyce, which.
Sorry, yeah, I should have switched
okay.
you, sorry.
Yeah, that is a much quicker turnaround grant. And then hopefully working with some of our enthusiastic pickleballers who have offered to help with fundraising for the last 25%. That is what I have right now. Oh, and this is, sorry, Joyce, the revenue reduction. So we are bringing the revenue down to $115,000. That is really a big reflection of not having that aftercare program and switching from having our contractors be either renting the halls or becoming staff members.
Okay, do we have any questions? Board members? Not seeing any. Pam? You're on mute. There you go.
Yeah, I do have one question. What is the percentage of revenue that's projected to cover the rec department expenses in FY25?
I don't have that calculated percentage of revenue to cover expenses. I will have that for you in the packet. I will
All right,
calculate
thank you.
that. Yep.
Any other questions from board members?
I guess I have a question about this revenue reduction. Why is there revenue reduction? Are we not seeing enrollments? Is it revenue reduced as a result of not having expanded offerings? Not necessarily concerned about revenue so much as revenue signals interest, right? So is there less interest, or is what's
It's
happened
definitely-
with the programs reduced?
There's not less interest at all. That's definitely not the issue. The issue is I am projecting lower because I personally, in my own personal capacity, cannot do more.
So in the past, these programs were successful as a result of the director's individual efforts to provide them. Is that what I'm hearing?
That is a lot of it.
Okay.
Pam, I'm not sure if you have another question or not, but I'm going to ask one before I get back to you. So do we have an estimate of how much of a reduction we're going to have in offerings? Do you have any idea about that, Bree?
So I'm only offering 2 weeks less of summer camps. It's not a significant change. So
Okay.
the 2 weeks less of summer camps, all youth programming that are sports will still run the same, and any volunteer-led adult offerings will still run the same.
And what about the after-school program?
I am not opening that again. We
Is-
have not had that for 3 years now.
Okay. All right. I think we probably, if we don't have more board questions, are there any questions from anyone else?
I mean, I have another question. I also sent it to Brennan. Should I wait until it's answered through these channels?
If you think it's appropriate to ask it here, and if Brennan knows what you're talking about.
Sure. So, I mean, we have a reciprocal license agreement to use our school spaces, right? We pay the school for the use of those. I think on the basis that, we wanted to have programmatic activity. Do we still have this? Are we still using the school for that endeavor, or is there no efficacy anymore to the reciprocal license agreement?
I use the school for almost all of my summer camps. I also use it throughout all of the winter for basketball programming, and then I use it for our mud season programs.
Okay, that's awesome.
Great. Anyone else? That looks like
I should also mention, Roger, so that licensing agreement also covers any time I have anybody on the fields. So it's not just the school, it's also our town green.
Right.
Priscilla, did you have a question?
Yes, please. This Marion Cross school rental fee, I believe I've made it clear before, it just rankles with me. It feels like double taxation of taxpayers, since the taxpayers pay for the school and now the rec department has to pay this. And I don't understand why that was ever put into effect, and it's a fairly new arrangement. And the other question I have is, just forgive me for being stupid, but I guess because I haven't absorbed enough of everything, but I'm saying, wow, $75,000 for the tennis courts. I'm not saying it's not needed. And 15,000. And do we have that money sitting there somewhere now? I mean, are we raising that with taxes? New taxes?
Yes.
Yes, what? Yeah, sorry.
Yes, taxes. Joyce, do you want to speak to that?
Yes, I can speak to that. So anything that's a line item in the budget is something that we are raising taxes for. So this is where we have, the department heads had gone through very carefully. And when we looked at the budget stuff, we looked at capital expenses excluded from their budget increases and capital expenses increase. And you can see for the recreation department, overall, they have reduced their budget this year by 4%. If I take out the capital expense increases, then they are actually reduced the budget 28 point something percent. But if it's in here, it's estimated in the calculation for the taxes that we would raise this year.
Thank you.
And I'm sorry, Roger, do you want to go first?
I mean, I guess I just wanted to make the note that, like, if what we're hearing from staff is the ability to grow our recreational offerings, our programs, and our events requires additional staff, I am, particularly since the success of the department has always run on the individualized efforts of a director, of that one person, whether it's Bree or someone else, then I'm, of course, think that we should entertain that suggestion, but it's absent of a plan as to how these offerings will expand, which we're not hearing today, then I don't know what we are to consider. I think there's some obfuscation about who is animating whom as to the suggestion of that director position. And what I'm hearing very clearly is it's a future growth question. That's what I'm hearing from the presentation. So if it is wanted, if it is to be requested, then I just want to state that I'm open to hearing more. But in the absence of hearing more, in the absence of a presentation, then it doesn't get funded, right?
Bree, can you just restate again why you're not?
So I am not asking for an assistant right now.
Okay.
So sorry if there's any question about that, but it's okay.
I think what we're looking at, if I can just jump in real quickly, is stepping back maybe for this next fiscal year, letting Bree kind of run this as solo and you know, having a little bit of a reduction there because of her, you know, just doing this all by herself. And then I think when we come back in next year, we might very well be looking at, okay, let's look again at how could we expand this and how could we get Bree some assistance so that she's not doing it all herself. And then hopefully a more thoughtful plan on how we would fund that. You know, the idea that it's all revenue neutral or everything pays for itself is very difficult when you're starting up new programming because you really have no ability to predict these things. So I think that's where we'll be possibly next year.
That's great.
Can I just ask, it looks like the director's wage was higher in 23 than it was in 24 or 25. Is there a reason for that?
I was gonna look at that because Brennan asked me that, but I know that when we created the budget this year, all the salary lines, we went back to the actual salaries that were being paid. So I'm not quite sure what happened that we got something else in fiscal 23 to move that up above.
When you, Joyce,
I can research that and find that answer though.
Joyce, when you did wages, we did a one-time COLA increase. And so I imagine that one-time COLA increase wasn't assumed as more than one time.
That could be it. Yeah, you're right, because that was all of
Okay.
history. Yeah, thank you, Roger.
So let's look at that for all of the departments. I mean, if people want to discuss those kinds of adjustments, then that's a separate conversation. But like, we should make sure that we're not doing that without a conversation.
Right.
Yeah. I didn't notice it with anyone else, but I wasn't looking that closely. Okay. I don't see any other questions. Checking again. Good. Thank you, Bree.
Thanks, Bree.
All right. Whoops. Sorry about that. I was moving my paper so I could see who's up next and I got to the wrong slide here. Okay, Brennan, there you go.
Okay. So I will just kind of run through this fairly quickly. Up at the top there, what we're seeing as far as increases are largely a result of the contract that I entered into with the town there for the next foreseeable 3 years. And so there is some increases there from what was budgeted, certainly, to what has been kind of contracted here going forward. We also broke out, because I think there was a question earlier about the additional town manager, assistant town manager, and administrative assistant working in that office. So those are now broken out into 2 different lines there, just to be more transparent about how that will look going forward. Working down here, again, we had budgeted some increases, and just trying to see what's kind of jumping out. The training, here's another small change. So we did increase the training a little bit, which would be kind of professional training within the town manager's office. And we have also separated out the treasurer's training dues and conference expenses, kind of keeping those as separate now. They were at one point all combined into kind of one line. So now the treasurer's dues will be $1,000 there per year. And I think that's all I had there. Again, down at the bottom, there's a very small increase there for the new a new GL account, which would be funding flag replacement for the Main Street celebrations, kind of honoring our veterans. And it's a kind of small amount, but we wanted to make sure that we were including that in our budgeting. I think that's all I have there. So, trying to toggle my screen so I can see my slides here. As far as general administrative expenses here, I guess the increase we had was in remote meeting services, so that's Zoom accounts. We are actually, I know a question has come up often as to how many accounts do we have and how many are we using? And I know Miranda has continued to try to work to cull some of those kind of accounts out that are just, we're paying a dues for those on a regular basis, but they may not all be used on a regular basis. So trying to be a little frugal there as well. And then the other increase I think that would be called out here is the computer equipment. So what we're finding here is that we feel to be realistic with keeping up with expenses of kind of technology and trading up computers as they become obsolete. We're looking to increase that a little bit as well from what was budgeted in fiscal year 24. And then the designated fund for equipment is going away this year. Oh, there we go. Okay, down at the bottom now. Okay, so looking at capital expenses here, we have, basically, a fund balance to start with for the town manager office, and we're not quite sure how much of this is going to be spent. So we've talked about Tracy Hall. I think that maybe is going to be on the next slide. Joyce, is that correct?
Yep, Tracy
Yeah.
Hall.
Yeah. So we are kind of in the process right now of having our architectural study that's going to be looking at what recommendations we would have. We're going to have some public engagement going with that. So we don't really have a good handle right now on what the expenses would be there. We did increase kind of the repair and maintenance line just because we do know that we have kind of an aging building with recurring and new repair costs. So we wanted to kind of adjust up for that. And I guess next slide, Joyce. So here's kind of a look at that capital expense. We have put back, just for some discussion here, the idea of replacing the Tracy Hall boiler, which I know we've had multiple votes on, and I'm not sure that there's any change in the interest there, but I still feel like that is probably something we would want to look at some point in the future, is how do we create a more reliable, resilient heating source for the building. And that might be something that we can discuss a little bit as we get into the architectural study, because I know they are going to be looking a little bit at the heating systems. Okay, I think that's all I had for that one, Joyce. So let me pause before I'm going to do the planning and zoning as well. But did anybody have any specific questions about the kind of town manager, administrative, Tracy Hall?
Pam, I see your hand up.
Yeah, looking at the professional services line item. What goes into that? What gets charged to professional services?
Where are we here? Give me a.
It's on your first slide.
Slide 18.
I don't have page numbers. I didn't print.
Yes, it's slide 18. Town manager, town administration expenses.
Right.
Yeah.
So right below Vermont retirement, it says
Yep,
professional services, 18,691 for fiscal year 25. I'm just wondering what gets charged to that.
I'd probably have to go back and look through kind of the expense pieces of that, because I'm nothing. I don't think that is the audit. That was the first thing that popped into my mind, but I think that is not.
No, we have a separate line item for that.
Yeah. So I don't know. That might be one we'd have to get back to you on, Pam, as far as specific expenses.
That's fine. Thank you.
I think other board members might remember, it seems to me in my time, it was kind of used for all sorts of things.
Well, it used to be used for legal, but then legal got separated out away from professional services. And so,
I don't actually see the audit as separate here. Am I not looking correctly?
Audit, I believe, is in the finance department.
Okay.
It is
So
a separate, thing, but I don't remember what department.
yeah, I
So
think
it
it
may
is.
have it may have been held over from the bulk of that may have previously been the audit and it never got adjusted. So I know that contracted services was the Guile Mountain parking lot study, which is not funded this year. Is that right? Or is? No, it's
I
not.
think it got taken out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was
But-
not there in 24 or 25.
But I'm looking at actual unaudited for fiscal year 23 at 8568. I'm just wondering, do we still need to put 18,000 in there? Or is that something that could be reduced to maybe 10? Depending on what actually gets billed there.
Yeah. Well, let's look at that for our next meeting. We can come back with some answers on what we've billed recently and take a look
Great.
at what we're projecting.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
Priscilla, did you have your hand up? No.
My question's answered. Thank you.
I was looking at the slide, where is it? It's the one that has a note about, it's slide 21 again. Tracy Hall is on the general ledger in the DPW group, therefore DPW roll-up summaries include Tracy Hall.
Right, so when you look at the summary screens, there was confusion on my side as far as who was managing Tracy Hall, because was it in building and grounds or was it under town manager? There's a couple of them that are like that, so I put this note in here so that if you're comparing with the summaries, you'll see that that is in summary with the DPW group.
So
So if we went back to the summary slides, for non-salary items, just the regular expenses, this is part of the DPW's group because that includes building and grounds.
So am I correct in assuming that that would be for maintenance kinds of things, whereas the one under the town manager would be for bigger things that are not just?
No, it's all one group of GL accounts. This
So-
Tracy Hall is its own department, so to speak. And it's the different departments on the general ledger are managed by different folks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Brennan?
Yeah, well, I was just going to say in this case, we just had a recent conversation about this where we're going to really, since the personnel that go with that are kind of under the DPW's direction, we're going to have kind of a more collaborative look at how those expenses get approved and planned for. So we're kind of having Chris step a little more into that.
That's smart.
Okay,
I have a question.
Roger?
Brennan, I had emailed you sort of as a general organizational matter to have the computers sort of all under your purview of your office, but in hearing a little bit of your explanation or your pitch about the cost for the computers, I feel more strongly about that. I don't know if that's something other board members agree with, or if that's something you want to take a look at, but I think like all technology replacements should really come through your office. So that way we can get on a replacement schedule that meets everybody's needs. So software can be considered. We have a little bit of data collection. I would just advocate for that to the extent there's time and interest.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, and I think that is kind of how we are managing that right now, Roger, is most of the appropriations are all of those are coming through the town manager's office, but we're also engaging with CCI to try to come up with a better handle on replacement timing. So obviously kind of reactionary, oh, my computer just died, I need to get a new one, is not the best strategy there. So what is becoming obsolete, is there a useful life cycle, kind of like we were talking about with the police cruisers, where you can try to plan for replacing equipment as opposed to just reacting to it.
And server maintenance is largely the CCI agreement?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And then one other question, if I may. I assume these archaic, what I'm judging to be an archaic photocopiers are lease agreements. or I don't know if we own them outright, but anecdotally, I believe that like leasing is the best, but I'm not certain of what the use is for the building. But I don't know if these costs, I think there's a line item that like suggests that you should budget for the leasing, but I don't know if the money's actually in there. So has that been looked into yet?
Yes, I can speak to that because when I inserted the lease lines in for each department, so they had that option, I did ask each department head to kind of look at that and see if there are leases that are available instead of buying things outright.
Yeah.
Currently, the town owns all of its copiers, except we have one lease agreement for the copier that is at the police department.
Okay.
Other than that, we own them outright. But I agree that because they go outdated so quickly, it is more cost effective in most cases to actually lease an office copier, printer, all in one, whatever it's going to be. If it's a desktop printer copier, then it is cheaper to purchase that and stick it on somebody's desk. Those are disposable, but the big office machines, it is more cost effective overall to lease those.
Okay. And then I have one final question, if I may.
Go ahead.
The phones, I tried to call Brennan at his extension and it didn't seem to work. But that's not the first instance where I've had some woes with calling. And I know that people in Tracy Hall could have other stories as well, I imagine. So what are we, what options are available to us with phones? I had written to Brennan and suggested that we consider part of the Zoom agreement we could consider for phones now. Many businesses don't even have, like, they use app-based products with a handset. So I don't know what time has been spent for that, or if we want to look into it, but I think we should probably consider it.
If we could, yeah, I think we spend a fair amount of time dealing with phone and wiring issues. And we haven't really had any affirmative discussion about it to
Okay.
this point. So that might be one to push to next year when we can
Okay.
get a little more information.
And
Okay.
I'll get to you, Pam, next. I just wanted to follow up and echo Roger's point. I think I strongly agree we should have a central IT management, and it makes sense to make it in the town manager's office. And that would go for not just hardware, but software license agreements and all that sort of thing, so that we could make sure that we were especially turning on and off accesses and not paying twice for a license when we didn't need to. Okay. Pam, you had a question?
I just wanted to ask if the phone system might be part of the Tracy Hall improvement plan, because the wiring goes through the building. And if we're doing, upgrades to network wiring and electrical wiring, maybe the phone system could also be upgraded at the same time. Just something to think about as part of that improvement study.
Okay, so just to keep moving along here, if we can go back to the planning and zoning slide. Okay, so this one, again, is fairly straightforward here. At the top, we're talking about the vacant planning director position. I'm estimating right now, kind of based on what we believe to be the market rate, that budgeting $95,000 is probably the appropriate ballpark there. And we could end up hiring for slightly less or hiring for a little over that, but I think that's probably a good reasonable number to plug into the budget. The other one down halfway through, the historic preservation grant for Jones Circle. So this is really just kind of a pass through. It's kind of a timing issue here where we're budgeting for something that's going to get reimbursed back into the town. So that large increase there is really not a large increase. And then down at the very bottom, we're looking at budgeting $2,000, assuming we'd have a new director in place here in fiscal year 25. That would allow them to pursue some type of training or professional development throughout the year. So I think that one's pretty straightforward. Any questions about it?
Pam has one.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, would it make more sense to run that historic preservation grant through Fund 51, which we have designated for matching funds? So if we pay out of the matching fund and then we get reimbursed, I think it would make more sense to run it through Fund 51, which is the program performance development, whatever it is. But that was what it was designed for, to pay for studies and to provide matching funds.
So the Jones Circle is just a pass through because when you get the revenue report next week, you'll see $7,500 on there. It's actually a 3-year grant that started at the end of fiscal 23. We've got some work that has been expensed in fiscal 24, and we've got the remainder of the work that will be expensed in fiscal 25. But you can see that we've only got 1,000 expensed in fiscal 24 for the budget, when we have a total of 75 that will be recouped. So by putting, I didn't put anything in the revenue budget for fiscal 24 for that line. So this year, fiscal 25, you'll see the revenue offsets the total of that for 75. So there is no cost for that. It's just literally a pass through.
Right, but my question was, can we run the pass-through through Fund 51, which was designed for matching funds?
I will look at the Fund 51 purpose and see what that says.
Okay, thank you.
We don't have any more questions from the board. Jan Lasvier? Go ahead.
Yeah. Yes, I thank you, Marcia.
Mm.
I wanted to point out a possible need going forward around the mapping line item there. We have GIS mapping software on there. I've talked to Brennan about the possibility that our new hire, and we put it on the job description, a preference or a possibility of them having GIS capability. If they do not, then we would most likely be proposing a route to get TROC to update our map overlays into GIS, which I would guess would cost more than $2,200. So I can work with Brennan to look at those contingencies, but I just wanted to flag that.
Thanks, Sean.
Brennan, is that something we should budget for, knowing it might not be needed?
Well, again, I think maybe Jan and I should try to figure out what an actual cost would be, how much over. You know, obviously we're budgeting, we're projecting out, 8 months in advance, and things change in that period of time. And again, what we're trying to find in this this planning director, zoning administrator role is somebody that has some capacity to do that work in-house. And again, there's no guarantee that we will find that, but that's the goal at the moment. So
yeah.
I
just started the conversation with Peter Gregory at the Regional Commission just to try and get an estimate, or if we wanted to do 5 overlays, what would it cost? So within a few weeks we could probably have an idea, and then it depends on the candidates.
Yeah,
Good.
fair enough. Well, let's John and I will talk about that a little bit offline and see if it does make sense to increase that. Again, we're working on a budget, and it's possible we might budget for this and then find we're overspending that a little bit because we just need to, and that's kind of how it works.
And I'm sure you've already thought about it, whether or not we have the GIS software, we're going to need that.
Yeah,
Well, that's what this is for. The 2,200 is for that.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, it's probably
yeah, there it is.
technology that changes rapidly as well. So
Okay.
updating that.
Thank
All
you,
right.
Jane.
If
I
there are
don't see any
no
other questions.
I don't see them either. So I was going to say, I think that was the last slide for me.
Yes, that's the last one of yours. Finance is up next. So Barry.
Okay, so we'll turn it over to Barry. Thanks.
Okay, everybody hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So if we look at the first few lines from finance assistant wage down through Vermont retirement, that's all about Ashley and my wages. The percent change reflects the change in salary amount and some changes in benefits, as well as a COLA increase. Professional services in this case is actually NEMRIC, paying NEMRIC beyond their regular 15 minutes of support for specific questions. Another increase that you'll see if you look at the budget change percentage, the audit, the independent audit is increased because we had to have a single audit for fiscal year 23. So we're anticipating that again, because a lot of the grants are multiple years. You see a 25% increase in printing. It's $25. It's not a lot of money, but that's for the printing of the postcards for the reminder for tax payments. Let's see. The other thing that's increased is software. It was probably under budgeted in the past. Looking back historically, the software cost prior to 2020 was under $1,000, but in the last 3 years, it's been in this range of $4,200 to, $4,600 or $4,800. So that's really just an amount that's closer to an accurate amount. And the staffing, we increased that because I'm new and Ashley is relatively new. So it would provide us opportunity to take advantage of some additional learning. Next slide, Joyce. And then on this slide, you have your debt service. We have the town garage and public safety building, the public safety facility bond, and the Brown Schoolhouse pedestrian bridge. You also have the tower bond, but that was talked about with the emergency management last week. So those are reflective of the principal payments and the interest. The Windsor County bond, we have not heard from the treasurer yet what that amount is going to be. So we used the fiscal year 24 rate, so that may change. The tax expenditure, the tax adjustment and abatement section, we used a 5-year average. So the prior budget in fiscal year 24 was 3,000. Put in 4,300. Went back and looked at like a 5-year average, a 10-year average, a 15-year average. It's different each year, and the 4,300 seems low comparatively to a 10-year average or a 15-year average. But we decided to stay with the 5 because that's the average we've used on a lot of other expense items throughout the budget. And then at the bottom section, the insurances. We are still in process of renewing the property and casualty insurance and workers' comp. So we don't have a set dollar amount for those coverages yet. So again, used prior year budgeted numbers. The unemployment insurance rate assessment was in there in fiscal year 24 at 3,300. We've actually received the invoice for that coverage, and it was 6,160. So we used the actual cost from the invoice. So again, it's just a matter of the amount that was budgeted and what the true expense was. That's it. So any questions anybody has?
Start with board members. Pam Smith.
Yeah, looking at the audit expense, we're going to have a single audit this year, correct? In fiscal year 24 for the ARPA funds. But what other funds do we have going forward that would require a single audit?
I can tell you what the specifics are. We can tell you what those are, but there's some grants that have federal money that pass through the state. that bring us up over that $750,000 mark.
Okay, if you could have that list next week, I would appreciate that.
Sure.
And I had one other comment, and that's on the tax adjustments and abatement. I'm worried that that 4,300 is very low, given that we're going through a reappraisal year.
Mhm.
It could end up being closer to what the unaudited actual for fiscal 23 is. So I just worry about whether that 5-year average would cover what's needed there.
So I can tell you what the 10-year average was, 5,138. The 15-year average was 10,524. And a 20-year average was 11,522.
I don't know what our reappraisal years look like, but maybe those would be the ones to zero in
look at.
on. Yeah,
Mhm.
and see if we see bumps in those years, more than a non-reappraisal year.
Okay.
Thank
That
you.
was great, Barry, having these answers so quickly. That was lovely.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Barry,
And I can just jump in on the single audit. If we get that FEMA money, that's going to cause a single audit in fiscal 25. So
Mhm.
that's the short answer for that.
Barry, you mentioned that we needed information from the treasurer on the Windsor County bond. Is it the
Mhm.
same situation for the Windsor County equalization?
So in the prior year, those weren't split. It was just put under Windsor County bond. So it was only one GL number. There's actually a split on that bill that we get from them. So the amount, the 61,444, are the two together. So when we hear from the treasurer, we'll know what the bond portion is and what the equalization portion is.
So we need that information.
Yeah, we haven't got it from her yet. We're using the fiscal year 24 rate at this time.
It comes late.
Okay,
Yes, it does come very late, well into December.
so we should have it in time for our budget decisions. Okay, that's good to know. Matt Sweat, did I see you? Did you have a question? No? Okay. Anyone else have a question? Pam, is your hand just up, or do you have a question? No question. Okay.
I have one question.
Roger?
Are you waiting for the state to make a decision about NEMRIC, or does the town of Norwich want to make a decision about NEMRIC? For a long time, for a while, I don't want to say for a long time, for a while we heard sort of about, I think it was really in 2018, 2019, there were a lot of discussions about sort of the software not meeting our needs or not helping, not providing, well-formatted reporting. Is that view sort of shared by this office? Is there a desire to begin to explore away from that software, or would we wait to the state? Are we satisfied by their technical support? What do we need to do, if anything? Sounds like nothing, I guess, because you didn't budget for it, but I did want to give you the opportunity.
No, I mean, I think it's something that I've started to look at, and some of it can be simple. It has to do with maybe have the numbering of the GL accounts and what numbers go where, so that you can run reports in a specific way. Because once the information goes in, it comes out. It's just the way you put it in determines how easily it comes out, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
So it's a little bit challenging in that way, but most accounting softwares are challenging in one way or another. They're not all 100%. And, you can export to Excel and try to use Excel to get what you need. I prefer to have the accounting software be your main source and get as much out of that as possible. And NEMRIC does have its limits, but it's the issues that I've run into since I've been here aren't just with NEMRIC, the software, it's with the setup of it as well. So, I think if you can you would have to look to see what the alternatives are, you know, what other software is available and acceptable for fund accounting and helps to work for some of the state reporting requirements. But I also think that there are opportunities to make the software as it's currently used better, and just in naming conventions, for example, you know, having a little bit more consistency, I think can make things a little clearer. Is it going to answer everything? No, but it's a step in a better direction. So I think it's something that should be looked at. But I also don't want to look at it, you know, 3 months into the job, because I also don't feel I have enough information to know what's needed. And I think making a decision this soon would probably not be a good idea.
Okay, that's lovely. It's not for me. I would say it's not for me or any board member to have a judgment about our accounting software, but because it's some rumblings I've heard rumblings in prior years that I wanted to create that space for you to have a conversation. So thank you for your answer.
Yeah.
Wise answer. Thank you very much. All right, I don't see any other questions, so thank you very much, Barry. That was great.
Pleasure.
Okay, Lily is up.
Hi there. So this is my first budget season. So please bear with me and let me know if you have any questions. Most of my stuff is pretty straightforward. The first slide is for the Board of Civil Authority and Board of Abatement and statutory meetings, which means elections. In fiscal year 25, we're going to have 2 elections in August and November. And I think the main thing I've adjusted on this slide is postage, because I anticipate a high number of BCA meetings due to the reappraisal. And there will be a lot of absentee ballots mailed out. And I guess unless there are questions on this slide, we can move on to the next one.
Looks good.
So again, not much has changed between last year and this year. The 2 big things that I'm asking for fiscal year 25 is an increase in training budget, because there really wasn't much of a training budget. And a capital expense, which I think is on the next slide. So, yep, the increase in training is there in the peach, and then there is the capital fund request. So you all should have received a packet that I sent today, all the select board members, with a justification and some explanation for both the increases in training and the ask for the scanner. And I'm happy to take any questions you have.
Board members, any questions? Pam?
Yeah, I wasn't clear on the cost of the scanner. Does this $20,000 you're asking for pay for that scanner, or is it?
Yep. So I got one quote, and I would go out and get others before I commit to it. But the quote was $13,950 plus shipping and handling. So $20,000 would more than pay for it. I would be happy to roll over whatever is left into the next year, because in 2026, I'm going to need a new map cabinet.
Okay, thank you.
So following up on that, Lily, the scanner that's something that we're going to own, because we're going to need it going forward for everything that we do, right?
Yeah, so it's really an archival scanner. It's meant to support archival books, so it's got this V shape to it. And it's not your like every day I have to scan something sort of scanner. You can use it for that, but it's sort of larger and clunkier than just taking it down to the photocopier and scanning it and sending it that way.
So I guess I was just wondering, in my past life, I think, you know, having to do a lot of archival stuff, the company provided the scanner for the big project. And that's why I was kind of thinking we couldn't lease it from the company, because going forward, you'd still be needing it occasionally.
So I did ask them about leasing, and they have 2 and 3 month leases, but this is going to be a multi-year project. We just have so many things that need to be back scanned and indexed at this point. And not enough personnel to do it, that it's really going to be years and years of solid work whenever we can get to it.
So would
So-
it be more efficient to hire someone to do that and rent it for a while? No.
No,
Okay.
I mean, no.
I mean, if I may, Marcia.
Roger.
Yeah, so I mean, I think I do want to sort of contextualize this scanner. In 2008, which was admittedly 15 years ago, I remember interning for a major art reference library, and we took like a field trip to look at the Bookeye scanner from the other major art reference library to visit it, right? Because it was so new and so expensive. And so it is, it is archival purposes, but it is also like a, I would say, a lot, arguably for a small town. That being said, they are the best to ensure the least amount of bending and damage to archival documents. I do wonder if there is more of an everyday purpose and if this could meet goals of digital adaptation, because these Bookeye scanners are also in like academic libraries. So you use them for archival and restoration because of how they're situated for books, but they also are just like a more efficient scanner. So while I think it's a lot for the needs of a small town, I think if it's used by all departments for multiple goals, it is an investment that I think makes sense. I had asked Lily about printing, because although ultimately you want to be able to put the scan onto a flash drive or send to an email address, there are some people who would want to be able to print. And so it sounds like it has those capabilities. I wonder also if there are some features where if you can have an ADF scanner, then it can replace an existing photocopier as well. And so you can imagine a situation where multiple departments will use the Bookeye scanner. I guess all that. So I guess I would say that like this is a good purchase for the town of Norwich if it is for multiple departments and multiple uses. And I think we should think maybe a little bit beyond just the merits of
Vault.
using, just beyond the vault. Yes, beyond the vault.
Thank you for that, Roger. No, in my packet, I included the estimate from COT Systems, which has done some of our back scanning before. And, to back scan the next 30 volumes I have of land records will cost almost $16,000. So, we can either send those off to be back scanned and then still have 21 boxes of archival things and all of the marriages, births, and deaths and blah, blah, blah. And so 500 maps to scan, or we can buy a scanner and do it in-house. And the other thing to note is that even if we send it out to COTS, they don't do any of the indexing. So it falls to us anyway to do the time-intensive indexing either way. I mean, the scanning is sort of a drop in the bucket in terms of time. It's the indexing that really sucks up time.
It also, if I may, it also has like sort of a dashboard, right? So you have depending on the desire of the user, you have the ability to do some sort of basic like ledger, like, right, where you could say like, oh, these were the uses and these were the revenue generating uses and these were internal uses. And so there's like a data collection work in this as well.
I'll defer to you on that because I have not yet had the software demonstration.
Yeah, so anyway.
Not to belabor this, but if you could look into whether this could, in my experience using these, you can sometimes have things scanned directly to a database. And so I'm wondering if we could do something about improving how we store, for example, selfishly, the select board work, right? So it would be nice to have something that was searchable and it was no work for somebody. You just scanned it in and it was there.
Yeah, I can certainly look into that and let you know what they tell me.
Great.
That would be wonderful from my end too.
Yeah. Any other questions about this? Well, that's great. It looks like we're coming into the 21st century.
Thank you all.
Thank you,
Absolutely.
Lily.
Thanks.
Okay, the Lister's office is up next, so Cheryl, I believe, is here.
Good evening. Hello, all. We're all here together. We've had a meeting as well, and we were waiting for our turn. So we missed a little of the beginning of your meeting. Apologies to that. And hope there's nothing too fancy that we need to do tonight other than reiterate our request for the 2025 budget. Based on a next slide, I think it is, Joyce. There's a change of how we wanted to lay out the office work. But apart from that, we were pretty much in line with last year's budget, or the current year budget, kind of coming in slightly under the current year budget. With that said, we've submitted to you, I sent earlier today an email just explaining that we wanted to combine the stipend and the clerk wage line items into one that would give us a lister wage account to use, and the 3 listers would come back to doing the listers, the work of the clerk and the work of the listers in the office. This would be supplemented still with the assistance of an assessor who would, help with those areas where we're feeling uncomfortable and could use the benefit of an independent, an assessor for that work. With that said, we'd be happy to answer questions with regard to this request.
Board members? Well, I'll ask a question. So what you're looking for is the stipend to go away, and instead you'll have wages for $36,510. And so at the moment, we've only got a stipend approved by voters, and we'd be having to change this to wages. That's question number 1. And question number 2 is, we had an assessor for years, and I've been trying to sort of wrap my head around and do a lot of reading about what's required for assessors and listers and who has what. But it seems like in my sort of awareness, we've always had an assessor, and now we have the assessing clerk, because the work of an assessor can't be done by the listers. So are you proposing that we don't need an assessor anymore? We're just going to have an assessing clerk wage?
No, Marcia, I think if you look at this slide, and I can't point anything because I can't point, but the first line item of the stipend goes away. Also, if you look down on the 3rd line, the assessing clerk wage of $27,000 in the current year budget is going away. So what we're saying is that the listers are going to go back to the format that has occurred in the past of being the staffing of the office and doing the work of the office that was done by the listers and a clerk. Down below, under professional assessing services, we still reflect $25,000 for an individual to be hired to come in and be that person. I think you were asking about, to help with the assessing work. Right now, we do have KRT appraisal doing the reappraisal, so that specifically doing assessments isn't as critical right now, because they're doing all the assessments over. They're doing the whole town over right now for this next grand list that's going to be ready in June, July of next year.
So does professional assessor services mean an assessor who's certified by the state and meets the requirements of the state?
We would like that. We hope for that, and that's the goal. It's, again, how many of them are available and who has time to reply to an RFP from us to request their services. If it's 1 day a week for, a portion of a day, it's pretty likely we might find somebody that would split their assessing skills amongst several towns, maybe 5 towns. And they could give us 1 day, maybe it's 1 day every 2 weeks to process the more technical stuff that goes on with some of the data changes that occur in our town.
So we've always had an assessor. Is that true?
No, I think, well, let's see, yes and no. So back before me, there were 3 listers that worked in the office. I think Ernie and Jonathan were part of that time. And there was an individual that did commercial properties only, mainly, unless there was a very sophisticated residential property that needed some additional service. But that individual was focusing mainly on the commercial properties in town. So that individual worked, I don't know how many hours a week or how much time.
It was just 2 days a week.
2 days a week. Okay. We
And
don't.
it was just commercial properties.
Just commercial. So prior to that, there may not have been an assessor in the office, Marcia. I mean, I can take you back to when it was a bunch of other individuals. There was 3 listers. There was not an assessor helping out in the town of Norwich lister's office. But there
Okay.
were the 3 listers doing it.
Okay.
So,
Is-
can
is
I-
there- Yes,
The other
Roger.
thing I would like to just mention quickly, sorry, is that we do have a district advisor that the state, gives each town a district advisor, and a lot of good help, assistance comes to us when we ask for it through our district advisor. They're not always going to give us an answer, but they can guide us and support us. Thank
Okay.
you.
Roger?
So, was there not a committee that met to discuss how assessing should be done in the town of Norwich? And wasn't the recommendation of that committee to move to a stipend model with a professional assessor? So in other words, wasn't this question fully vetted by our community? Wasn't a recommendation made, and didn't we adopt what is currently the status? Did that not happen?
And you're asking the listers?
I'm asking the listers in 2017, 2018, I believe it was there not a decision by the town to move towards a stipend model? Wasn't this question considered? Didn't we move you away from an hourly wage to a stipend model after a committee convened and studied the question?
I do think there was work done. It goes back before that, though, it's my recollection, because it was during the time that I think Jonathan and Ernie might have been listers, not me. But that was when I believe Neil Fulton was the town manager, and there was a vetting of that, which flipped it over to that, what you're speaking of. However, since that time, that has not been how the future has supported that scenario. And
That has
therefore,
not been how the future has supported that scenario. Can you tell me what that means?
yeah, I can tell you that that the work of the listers has grown and the work of an assessor has been reduced. And the clerk that we would love to have, the Jonathan Bynum of before, who knew how to do a lot of the work of the office, we don't have someone like that any longer. So the future, meaning today, is not replicating what was there when those decisions were made back in roughly 2012, 2013 was sort of, that's when the assessing firm came in and did the first townwide reappraisal in 2013, and then did a subsequent one in 2016.
Okay, and then I have one other question.
Go ahead.
So why do you believe that the town of Norwich can't retain an assessor or an assessing clerk?
Well, I think that I think the work that's done here is very unique. Others can speak up as well. I think it's a part-time position for the clerk, and it's not something that can be done remotely. So it lacks interest from that perspective. The learning curve is steep, and it takes time. And I think Masaki was one of those that did a great job in the office and then moved on with a belief that she had an opportunity to work towards a full-time position. You know, other individuals have been pulled away after accepting the job for things that they wanted to do instead, because the job isn't that attractive. If you're not into real estate, if you're not into the type of things that current use, you know, the topics are very unique and specific to the work in the office. It's just not that exciting for people. It's, to me, that's that answer.
And
Oh.
and the role of the assessor. So I believe your answer provides some context for an assessing clerk. Why do we have assessors who won't remain with the town of Norwich?
Well, our last assessor was with us 5 years, and I don't want to misstate anything, but there was quite a long drive for him to come to Norwich, and my understanding is that his only explanation to us was he resigned for a personal reason. We didn't try, we weren't able to get any of the additional information. So 5 years was a pretty long run, and I don't feel uncomfortable with what he decided to do. He's a gentleman with aging, and I think the drive was long and tedious, and he's taken on some more recent work that's much closer to where he lives. That's best I can give you for an answer.
Okay.
Yeah, and Ernie wanted to speak. Yeah.
Yeah, historically, the job of the listers is a pretty skilled job. You don't just walk in after you get elected. You actually have to take a good amount of training and get certified to actually do the job completely. Jonathan and I have done that. I think Cheryl's done it too. I mean, I know Jonathan and I because we took classes together. All of that started to change. What caused us to start needing an assessor, and I was not an assessor, this was actually just a bit before me, was when Act 60 came into play and started making things, you know, a lot of tax the whole role of the listers and assessors became very much more complex. The listers always were able to do the measuring of the houses. We'd go out to the houses, we'd measure the houses, inspect the houses inside, we'd do all the documentation. We would we operated the software to create the property cards, among other things, and so on. We did everything. The only thing that was complex, because it required a different way of assessing, and it required sort of an accounting kind of mind, was for the commercial properties, where you would actually always apply 3 different methods to come up with the valuations. That was why you really needed an assessor, simply because the assessment of a business is much more complex than the assessment of a house. So the listers did the bulk of the work. They would do all the houses. The assessors never touched the houses. The only time we've ever, and then historically, we would hire an assessing company for when we had to do the big push of all the houses all at once in 1 year, which is the townwide reappraisals, which is what we're going through, we're at the process of now. But you don't do that every year. The rest of the time, the listers go out and assess as they see improvements, especially improvements on the exterior of the house, or when we receive deeds,
Building permits.
and building permits, and those sorts of things that indicate that property is changing its value. Those we don't. The assessors are not used for that process at all, ever. Not historically, and not even now. The assessor that we had in the office all he did really was a certain complex piece of record keeping, which since, for instance, in my case, I'm familiar with those records myself, so that's something that I could easily do. We would need an assessor for that purpose. We'd still need it occasionally. We would still need it for the purposes of commercial assessment and a few other things. But right now, again, sticking with, there's two kinds of assessors. There's the kind that sits in the office, comes in a day or two a week. And then there's the kind that we've got right now who's doing the townwide reappraisal, which every town has to hire that kind of assessor when they need to do a reappraisal. They've been doing it in this town for as long as I've lived here. We've had listers have not done those type of townwide reappraisals. There's always been an assessing firm.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
So there's a distinction between what listers do and what the assessors do. That's
All
the
right,
big.
Roger, do you want to say something?
No, I just want to make my final comment on this. Like, there's absolutely, there's no reason the model should stay where we have a part-time assessor, we have contracted services for reappraisals, and we have an assessing clerk. That is, I agree and hear. I hear and agree that the job is technical, and so it can be hired as such. There's no need to have all of these services plus hourly wage. And I think the question was studied. The board asked for a study, provided an answer.
Okay, so Roger, when you say that there was a study, that was in 2017, and that came back to the board, and the board decided this is gonna be a stipend.
I don't know the year, but there is a PDF that looked at the three models of assessing services in Vermont, and it was recommended that there would be a hybrid approach.
Okay, and my concern, similar to last year, wages are different than stipends. And so I'm not entirely sure we could just make that change anyway.
So
Joyce?
Marcia, I think I mentioned in it that there's many towns pay their listers by an hourly rate. That is very common throughout Vermont.
Mhm.
I'm not quite sure how I can, sort of calm your concern. I don't know what that is again to that.
It's simply, is this a choice that is made by the select board, or is this a choice that's made by the voters? And I tend to think the voters have to say something about this. This is another one of those weird hybrid situations in a way, but it's not really the same like the town clerk's office, where another elected official, but the select board has to approve the salary. Their distinction is that by statute, they have to have an assistant, and that assistant is totally monitored by the town clerk statutorily. We don't have that under the Board of Listers. So that's my problem, that this is a different animal. I don't know if Joyce wants to add something to that before we take a question from Pam.
I've just been listening to everything that's being said. My concern is, what do we need to do as a select board? What do we need to present to the voters? What is the time frame for doing all of that? And changing things from stipends to wages does involve payroll laws. So I've not had a chance to look at that, and I know that Barry hasn't. I know Cheryl says she has, but I have not had a chance to address that. So as the finance department manages payroll, I believe that we should have a chance to vet that before we just say, oh, by the way, here, go and pay this. Because that's not being fair to this department. It's not uniting the town in the whole process.
Okay.
Well, Marcia, I would just say that we're already in the payroll. We already get a stipend. So we're already in each of us are in the payroll system. So we would just be switching from twice a year getting a stipend payment to just submitting a timesheet like anyone else for the hours that we work. And
well, actually stipends go through AP warrant and wages
No.
go through pay. They don't? I see it
No.
on, I see
No,
it
you
on the
don't.
warrant.
No.
The stipends are payroll. They are not an AP warrant item. They're in payroll. We
The
get them.
stipends, right, the stipends are paid through the payroll module. But stipends are different type of a payroll model than a wage is, which is different than a salary is. So there's
all-
different pieces of payroll processing that have to be incorporated with those different types of pay. And then it plays into our workers' comp insurances. It pays into our benefits and FICA withholding. All of those types of things are kind of touched upon by when you change those different pay types.
So
Okay.
with the proposal that we have, we're talking part-time. There's no benefits. It's sort of like Pam Mullen up in the planning and zoning office. There's no benefit. Well, maybe she has, I don't know, but we don't have any benefits planned for this. There's no vacation, none of that stuff. We're strictly looking at what we've proposed, which has FICA Medicare match for wages. There's a FICA Medicare match for stipends, just the same. That, you know, structure is very common throughout Vermont. And as I would go back to Roger and say, you know, 10 years later, what was done doesn't always apply to the future, to where we are today. And that's where, you know, the people of the town voted in March to retain the listers. And we are doing our best, and we're trying to put together a scenario of our department that works well, that would work better, so that we can do the job that's necessary as part of the town effort of what needs to get done every year, and that's producing the grand list.
It doesn't make sense to me. I mean, I just see the hours break down to 10.6 hours per week per lister. And I'm just not sure why. Oh, anyway, Pam has a question.
Actually, I have a comment. To your question about whether the voters approved the stipend or the select board, we did raise this question with Fielding, because the listers have been asking for quite some time to switch from stipend to hourly, well over a year now. And Fielding's response was that is a decision that needs approval of the select board. He researched it and he said that those changes can only be made by the select board. So it is something that is within your power. The voters would approve that change by approving the budget that is submitted to them at town meeting. It's my understanding, and granted, I returned to Norwich in the spring of 2015, but what I understood was prior to hiring Krajewski, the listers were paid hourly, and it was under Neil Fulton that the change was proposed that the listers go to a stipend, and that we have Krajewski, who was going to do a 3-year rolling reappraisal. And he left, I think, in year 5. So the second and you know, anyway,
All right.
he left in the middle of the third reappraisal cycle, as I recall. Anyway, so now the request that's coming from the listers, which I support, is that we go back from the stipend arrangement to paying them hourly, because they're taking on a lot of additional responsibilities that would typically be done not only by the listers, but some of it would be done by a clerk. And there's a history behind all of the different people who have come through the office since Jonathan Bynum, which I provided to you in a separate email to give you that background.
Okay.
As far as finding an assessor, they're hard to come by. They're in demand and they're hard to come by. So that's going to be a challenge.
Right. Pam, I want you to remember that the listers can't be select board members. And so if you have questions that you want, or you want information to be elicited from the listers, with your current hat on, you should be asking questions to get those rather than giving sort of your own version. Mary, you have a question.
Yeah, I just wanted to know what's the basis for the number of hours requested.
Can you
The
answer?
the basis of the 1658, Mary?
Yes,
Yeah, that was what we felt was a good number for the hours to cover the office. If it's 10 hours per lister roughly, and it isn't really meant to be equally divided, but that was the goal. It's what we thought was necessary to do keep the office open more, be more available to the real estate agents, the lawyers, et cetera, responding to emails and doing the work of building permits, following up on calling, people that are working on stuff at their homes. How are you doing? Are you started your project? The building permit piece takes a fair amount of tracking and time that we have to follow along to make sure we get an updated assessment based on how much work is done by April 1st of each year. That plus the current use program, staying on top of that. So I think that, I think that's a maximum number of hours. Or we think it is, not just me. I mean, it's work that we've all put together to figure out what we thought would be the right amount to cover the office. And it's not a full-time office by any means, much like the town clerk's office or, the town manager's office. So, we just feel this is the scenario that works.
Okay. Mary, did you have a follow-up or are you all set?
kind of. I mean, it does seem like a complex task, and you have the factor of wanting to have the office open for various parties to come in. I just didn't know if the estimate were based on a log that anybody ever kept, or based on what former employees used to do, or numerically how, if there was any written basis for it.
Not necessarily the clerk, when working here, was working a certain number of hours per week, up to 20 hours a week. We don't, as again, this would be enough to cover all of what we feel is important in the work. I mean, we could even work in the office without the office open, because it's sometimes easier to get your work done when you're not having an open door. But there's plenty of administrative type lister work that would be done over the course of those hours over the course of a year.
So to sort of wrap this up, it looks to me like it would be 36,510 for listers wages. 25,000 for professional services, right? Those would be the two asks.
Yes,
for-
and the professional services would be a contracted arrangement, not an employee.
Okay. And last year we went through a similar sort of request where you wanted to change this to hourly, and that didn't happen. It wasn't approved. I'm just wondering if the budget season process is the right time to bring this up. I'm a little concerned about the history and what we've done in the past and how we should appropriately go forward. I mean, it's like saying some towns just have assessors, but that has a process to go through just having assessors. So I want to be sure of the process, and I'm not sure that this is the right venue to make a switch of horses. And maybe we need to have, an agenda item for Lister's office and how it's functioning and what it needs to have happen, and let the budget season go forward. I don't know. What does the rest of the board think? Priscilla, you haven't said anything.
I know, I am married to a lister. I'm not sure I should say anything.
I agree. That's good. Pam?
I think that the budget process is the time to make these changes. Because if you put in the historical stipend and the assessing clerk wage, then we're not authorizing the listers to make the change that they've requested. And this gives some time for the voters to kind of digest this plan and get used to the idea that we're going to have a new format for the lister's office. I would hope that, you know, by having 3 people available to cover the office, maybe we could have a schedule again of when the office is going to be open, as we have in the past.
Okay.
But
mean,
I do
Roger?
support this, having, you know,
Mhm.
the history that I have.
Mhm.
Thank
Roger.
you.
I mean, I think we are required to ask a little bit more questions. We have no assessor. We struggled for getting assessing services for the reappraisal, and we have no clerk. And this lister was hired for that wage, and now we're being told just pay the listers. I mean, I think like there's a lot of ethical reasons, a lot of reasons of transparency. The board needs to ask some questions. I would ask that of any department. Like, you have retained no employees, and now you want to pay yourselves a wage. Like, can we be a little more curious as a governing body as to what we should do with that? So yes, I support a process that asks some questions.
Well, we have 2 clerks right now, because Cheryl's acting as a clerk, and we also have another contracted one. Mary, what's your opinion?
Oh, I think the listers are trying to get the work done, and I think the plan is very seat of the pants and a little bit inscrutable. I do think they will get the work done, but it's just the way it's organized is it's slightly incomprehensible. I also think it might be fair to know just that it's hard to hire in any of the departments right now, just because of the way the economy is, you know, for police, for planning. So, you know, I think we should keep that under consideration as well. I don't really like this, but I think I'd support it. I guess that would be my, you know, I would support it for the budget. I don't know how you reorganize it. If we had it as an agenda item, I don't know what, you know, what the solution is to this or what the vision is for this. So maybe other select board members do. I think we have a lot of doubts about it, sort of a patchwork nature, and some of it's historic. You know, usually listers did much of this work, and then the professionals came in. That didn't seem to work. There's been a lot of, as Roger said, inability to retain people, but as Cheryl said, it's a pretty boring job, especially if it's part-time. So it's kind of a hot mess. But I think the actual work could get done under this scenario, and I'm interested in that.
And last year we didn't do this, so I'm just wondering, you know, I'd kind of like a little more background and figure out, so I'd feel more comfortable about this is okay. You just change horses and change your methodology, go from stipend to wages, and it's just really the select board's decision. That just seems a little bit too pat. But I'd like some more information.
I think that's fair. Well, we also last year, we still had the
assessor.
Yeah, we still have the assessor, so that makes it, that is a change from last year, so.
That's true. Pam,
Is this something that maybe VLCT could give you some answers so that you could find some comfort in the request from the listers? You know, they have the Municipal Resource Center, and I'm sure if you think this is a legal question, I think maybe that's a good place where some answers might come from. Just a suggestion.
and council can give us some advice as well. Well, I don't think we can go much farther on this one without getting some more background.
But is it something that maybe we could try to resolve before we finalize the budget?
I don't know. I mean, I'm sure we can do a lot of digging.
I'd like to see us work on trying to answer this question before we finalize the budget.
Like just,
Go
Marcia.
ahead, Cheryl.
Thank you. To go back to the prior request, that was midstream in a budget year where the stipend had been already put through to the voters. And so to change it would have been a select board decision. And I think there was reluctance there to make a change because the line items were set. Now we're in a situation where we're proposing the change to go into the budget, so it's very clear, and then it's not changing line items within the budget midstream of a year. Again, we're happy to get backup for our position. If looking at the VLCT wages and benefits report shows the different departments or different listers offices throughout the state that are paid, by the hour. There's a few paid with stipends, and you got to look at this particular setups, and I understand that as well. But I think for us as elected officials to do the best job for our town, and I can tell you that it's very appreciated by many people that we're here and that they know us, and they appreciate talking with us when we're here in the office and getting information from somebody that's their neighbor. So I know that may sound unimportant, but it's really been a great thing. And with the reappraisal firm doing the work right now, we're helping the people of Norwich be in touch with them because some people are away, et cetera. There's just a lot of goodwill that comes out of our office, having our staff here and working with the townsfolk.
I'm sure. Mary?
I don't know if there would be time, but I'd just be interested to know if there are other towns that have all the different elements that are suggested here.
Yes, there are.
The different clerks, some of it's lister, some of it's assessor. I mean, yes, there are. It's a good, I'm glad to hear that, but I'd like to hear about specific examples.
I would just answer that. Yeah, just quickly, Mary, what I would just say is most offices, if they have an assessor, don't have the clerk. The listers do the clerking work, if you will, or the administrative work in those offices. And so there's an assessor and the listers.
And I was going to add that there's a lot of information on the Vermont Department of Taxes website, and including the assessing office scenarios, pros and cons of each option and how you might think about it. So
okay, that's good. I'll look at that.
I can send that to you.
Thank you.
All right. I don't see any other questions for this. Brennan?
All right, well, let's I guess close for the evening with a thank you to everybody for your full engagement there through the first 4 presentations. Again, to Joyce and to Barry for their hard work putting all the slide decks together, and to the department heads who have been really engaged and thoughtful in getting us to this point. Where I see this point being is we've now laid kind of the groundwork of each department's requests for this coming year. Operational budgets, again, very flat as far as an increase there. I haven't heard a lot of concerns about that. I'm feeling like if that's the case, then Joyce can really plug those into what we're going to be looking at for the 6th, which will be a full draft budget. I think there maybe are still some outlying questions about the capital piece of the budget, the expenses and the timing and the allocations for those. I don't know that we're going to be able to get a uniform consensus that would help Joyce to bring that back in. So I do think at the next meeting, we would like to come out of that meeting with this is the budget that the select board is willing to approve, and then clean that up for the 13th, right? If that's our goal, then any questions or things that we still need to have answers for, we would like to bring into the meeting on the 6th and try to work through those. And again, I don't know that we'll ever have a unanimous decision on approval, but a majority at least of folks that feel that's what we want to see presented there in the final draft. We have a tight timing issue here where, Joyce basically will have to get another slide deck created by, noon on Tuesday, the 5th at the latest, right? That's kind of, we have these turnarounds where we have 3 days to put a whole new packet together. So I would ask if you have questions as select board members that you feel need to be answered, or you want to get more information on, if you could get those to Joyce and I, maybe by the end of the day on Friday, if that's possible. That would give us Monday and some of Tuesday maybe to make sure we've gotten everybody's questions answered. Again, with 5 diverse people, it's hard to get a feeling of a consensus right now. So we'll do our best. And then Joyce can speak to this, but I think we will have this opportunity to run through some different scenarios, right? As far as the infusion of money and to buy down the tax rate, as far as moving monies maybe around throughout the workbooks, and Joyce will be able to kind of lead us through that. So if that makes sense to everybody, again, I would just ask you to try to put your thoughts together and get them to us for the presentation that we'll begin again on next Wednesday.
And remember, we had discussed, and it's in the minutes from the 21st, that everyone was asked to send to you and Joyce, maybe just to you, I don't know how you want to handle it, but would you be in favor of an injection of surplus money into the budget to reduce the monetary allocation? If yes, how much? And what would you recommend for use of the remaining surplus?
Yeah. So Joyce had also been working on different scenarios there. Again, I feel like the $500,000 scenario was a number that got us down from that double-digit increase in tax rate down to kind of what's been on par, 6.5%, 7% of an increase. I think I have that number right. So if people are comfortable with that, I think we can build that in. Maybe just a affirmative nod of heads. I think Joyce may also have the opportunity to move numbers around. What if it was $700,000? What if it was $300,000? So we could look at what that does to the actual taxpayers, rate that they will be paying. Anything else, Joyce, I'm missing there on that piece?
No, I think that said it well. I will have my live workbook up and running, and I did insert places that I can look at changing that surplus infusion to buy down the tax rate. So if we want to change it from 500 to 700 or 300 or 800 or whatever we want to do, I can do that on the fly. But I would like a place to at least start to put in the reports that I'm going to give to you in the packet next time, even if we do change something on the fly.
Does everyone agree with using 500,000 to start with at least for purposes? Pam does not. Priscilla, what do you say?
I
What does that mean?
gotta go digest some more.
Okay, Roger?
I mean, in principle, we should be using our surplus. Like, yes, we have it, so it should be used, and it should not remain undesignated. So yes, I don't love the tone of pick a number, any number. And I know that board members will need space to air their opinions on certain capital items. And I don't envy Marcia or Brennan for thinking about that process. I do not want to go line by line. I can tell you that. I don't think that's necessary. But I mean, I do think I appreciated Brennan's comments about, declaring the intention to, look at, staffing for the rec department more strategically. Like, I would argue that a lot of departments need to undergo that process, but I don't want to I don't know how appropriate it is to do that in the budget process.
So, Mary, I'll let you answer, then I have a thought.
I thought is to sort of start in the middle with 500,000, but I'd like to see different scenarios.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think Roger's point is well taken. We don't want to go line by line. We tried that last year. It wasn't productive. It never will be. but people need to come prepared with, you know, these are the things I really want to talk about, and or send them in advance, because I think Joyce would really, she kind of has been asking that for 2 meetings here. Tell us what's really important to you, right? So can we send them all to Joyce and Brennan so that they have that in advance? Because time is short. We just don't have, you know, a lot of time, and we want to really be productive on the 6th.
May I comment on why I said no?
Yes.
The $500,000 or some number close to that is the additional funding of these reserve funds. And so saying that we're going to buy down the tax rate is not really being honest with the taxpayers. What we're asking them to do is approve a lot of additional reserve fund requests. And I think those are the things that we should look at and determine whether the timing on these is what we should be doing at this point in time, and not just assuming that whatever is asked for is something we'll approve. I'd like to look at those reserve fund requests, and maybe what we do is we take those additional monies out of the budget and we ask the voters, do you want to put another $175,000 in the fire department equipment fund? Do you want to put another $200,000 in the DPW fund for a garage? You know, so we're not funding everything that's being asked for as part of the budget, but we give the budget with a 6% increase, and then we say, here are the additional things that have been requested. What do the voters think about this? And let them decide whether they want to use the surplus in that way.
Roger, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think I appreciate Pam's process of trying to sort of find like legs to stand on, which I think is an expression you use, Marcia. But like, I don't necessarily want that, right? I think it would be helpful to use town meeting effectively. So you need to focus the money, you need to focus the voters towards the kind of funding requests that would be most that we most need town meeting for, or we most need voters for. Like, I don't think we as a board should be asking them to approve the authorization of funds for heavy equipment. I think we need to make those decisions, but I think something like a building that has a programmatic output that has, you know, faces and spaces and activities in it, like that's exactly what we need voters for. So I would say, like, in December 6th, we need to sort of we need to decide what it is that we are going to fund through our work, and then what it is that we're going to like ask the voters for. I've said in the past that we should focus the voters on our physical and digital spaces, and we should do our own work for everything else. I don't know if that makes sense. And I would want everyone to like love that idea. I would want us to be enthusiastic about that idea and really have a clear narrative. I dislike obfuscation and lack of clarity. I would like to have a united front, you know, or at least a narrative where we can point to where we disagree or not, right?
Well, when we make a decision, we're united no matter what, even understanding that some people may have voted against it. The majority is the united. So
just to clarify, I guess I would like to focus the voters and the surplus question on things that we most need voters for. And I think not sort of the approach that I'm hearing about we shouldn't trouble them with.
If I may, I hope after all the work that the department heads have done and that we've done over the last 4 weeks, that we don't go back into a line by line, you know, should we cut, should we not, who knows better? The department heads make good judgments here. You know, if there are big ticket capital expense items that we want to have a little more discussion on, you know, we can have department heads there. We can rehash kind of the rationale there. But I think, again, we've tried to take the heavy lifting, hard work off the select board here and bring in, again, a pretty reasonable budget, I think, with a strategy to keep it at a 6.5%, 7% increase for the year by using some of the surplus money. And I hope people are understanding the strategy there. Joyce has also put together some potential proposals for using up other pieces of that capital surplus and kind of designating them into areas that have been underfunded in years past. So we can certainly look at that. I want us to be able to be productive on the 6th and be able to kind of have a game plan going into that where we can come out of it after an hour and a half or 2 hours or whatever it's going to take with here's our budget. We're happy, or nobody's ever happy, right, with a budget, but we're satisfied that we've done a good job here, and we're willing to bring this back in cleaned up on the 13th to ratify. So I guess for tonight, if folks, I don't want to get inundated with 30 different questions going in all different directions, but if we can get kind of any of the real concerns, big picture, big expense concerns out there to us by the end of the day on Friday, maybe Joyce and I and Barry can work to kind of come up with some different scenarios there, and that would be the most efficient way to address it. And then we can plug in that whatever additional surplus might be there when we've gotten to the end of, okay, are we all confident that we've made all of the cuts, or if there are going to be cuts, or that we've done a very thorough job of vetting the budget before we get to that point. That could be the last step, is how do we look at different scenarios to make this a palatable increase to the Norwich voters.
Which we are going to discuss with people in January so that there is ample input time, because this is surplus money.
Correct.
Pam.
Yeah, I'm just concerned about making these decisions by the 13th. Sorry, Will's got a cough. Making these decisions by the 13th, when a lot of them are things that I thought we were going to take to the voters in terms of how we use the surplus. So I don't understand the timing that is being proposed here.
Okay, let me try and explain it. I believe what's happening is we have gone through this review of what the departments have done. And as Brennan said, they have done extraordinary work to keep this down to the percentage that we asked them to do. The really only remaining issue, unless somebody has a huge issue with, something, and if you do, it better be a good reason, because the departments who do this work have thought it through and really been careful to carve down to the, just what they need. So beyond that, we have a surplus, and we're going to sit with Joyce and do what is recommended by people, that you consider taking some of your surplus and suggesting to the voters, we won't have to ask for as much money from you if we can use some of that surplus to put, plan for with our budget, so that it's like we're using something from the savings account rather than asking you to put in more earnings. And then there's still extra surplus, which Joyce has nicely packaged for us with some suggestions. And it's those suggestions that we'll be talking about on the 13th when we put everything else together. And then when we've all agreed on those suggestions, we will take them to the voters in 2 public meetings in January, where we'll say, okay, this is what we're thinking. And if people are, radically opposed to something, we can take that on board, because guess what? We have not yet reached the deadline for having to put together the warrant. What we're trying to do is talk to people and have that public input in January before we get to the warrant. But the first job of this body is to look at the work that's been done by the finance department, the town manager, and all the departments to present this to us. And now all we have to do is say, yep, just tweak this and we're happy, okay? And Joyce is going to play with those numbers next week, live, real time for us, so that we can see, oh, that makes a significant difference, or it doesn't make a significant difference. But we are not going to go through this line by line, because that's really not necessary. It's, you know, it's disrespectful to the people who do this work every day and understand what they need. And all we need to do is just think hard about the big stuff.
But if we ratify the budget on the 13th, how do we make changes in January based on input from the voters?
Brennan?
So I think the budget piece, the infusion of some of that surplus needs to get made on the 13th. And then the additional surplus pieces are things that we can have public discussion
Right.
about and bring in as warrants.
Demo. Welcome.
Yes, hi, thank you for allowing me to speak. I just want to say very briefly that what Marcia just explained so eloquently was a perfect scenario of how I think this should play out. I want to go beyond that and thank extremely Joyce and town manager and the departments for doing a real fine job. This year especially, I'm very impressed with Joyce's work in the breakouts and all the different charts. I just think it's very helpful. And yes, you probably all know I'm a big proponent of using some of that reserve money to get things level funded. And then go to the voters with, what you need beyond that. We've got the money there. We've got departments that have been hurting. I don't need to get into the specifics. You all know them. You're doing a fine job as a board. Just please consider what I'm saying. Thank you to the town manager and the department heads for doing the job that they do. And now hopefully you'll do the right job for the town of Norwich. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Demo. All right. If there are no other comments, I don't think we have any other business. So we could entertain a motion to adjourn. Unless Joyce or Barry or Brennan, do you have a final comment also?
My only comment would be just to reiterate what Brennan had said, that we have to bring the surplus to the voters and give them the option to do something with that. So what we're trying to do is just suggest, okay, here's some things that would really help the town managers, and by that I mean department managers, to get back up to where they need to be for funding their things. And with putting part of that surplus into the budget, we're actually helping to keep your tax rates low. So we're doing two things. We're actually three things, because we're using some of the surplus and we're getting the voters' approval to do that as we go through the budget process. In addition to that, we also can bring other additional pieces of that budget surplus to the voters on individual items to say, okay, how about if we put $300,000 in the fire apparatus? And how about if we put $200,000 in the town garage? If we put so much money into Tracy Hall, those each go on separate articles so that voters can say yes or no. Or let's, as we do this January session, we can go to them and say, okay, let's add this one in and reduce that one. But it's not changing the budgeted part, the operating budget part. You're talking in January about changing the articles for the use of that surplus money. And that would be all I would say.
Thank you. Very clear. All right. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn.
Thank you, Priscilla. Do I hear a second?
I will second.
Thank you, Mary. Everybody wants to stay together tonight.
More budget talk. It's
Yes.
so much fun.
Priscilla,
Sort of,
do you vote?
I vote yes.
Pam,
Yes.
Roger,
Yes.
Mary,
Yes.
Marcia, yes. We're unanimous and we are adjourned at 8:51 p.m. Thank you very much. See you again next week.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.